Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney in London. I just went to my multitasking screen there because I've got my multitasking up here. So I've got my full computer in Quest 3 V69 running David's VR Studios with hand tracking. Where is that coming up? I have some feedback here. Thank you so much to our members and patrons for supporting our work directly. You can become a member at UploadVR.com to support our work directly. David, what do we have today?
Yeah, so today we're going to start with three quick topics and then get into the real meat of things. I think Ian's got too much multitasking going on at once there. So we'll start by talking about the Steam hardware survey that shows that Quest 3 is now used on Steam more than Valve Index. So it's overtaken to take the number 2 spot, number 1 obviously being Quest 2. And it also shows the first signs of PlayStation VR 2's adoption on Steam, with some caveats there. We'll then talk about the fact that Meta has announced that it's killing its Spark AR engine, which essentially admits that smartphone AR is dead. And it also says a lot about what their path for augments and apps on AR glasses might be. We will talk about the fact that the Surreal Touch Kickstarter was funded, the 6DoF tracked VR controllers for Apple Vision Pro. For many of our audience, the lack of track controllers was the biggest limitation there of Vision Pro. So this is a pretty huge product for that ecosystem. We'll then talk at the end in our final two topics about two Chinese headsets that offer very different visions of mixed reality and spatial computing. Firstly, we'll talk about the news that just went up on UploadVR.com, which is that Play for Dream MR is coming to the West. It's a Chinese headset that's essentially like an Apple Vision Pro and Quest Pro crossover. It's heavily copying Apple Vision Pro's visor design, but uses a rear battery and ringless controllers so that it also can support games. And that's going to come to the West. And beforehand, we didn't know whether that was going to happen at all. And to be clear, that includes the United States. We will finish by talking about Pico 4 Ultra, the first direct competitor to Meta Quest 3, with the massive caveat that it isn't coming to North America. So it isn't coming to the United States. We'll talk about my hands-on impressions of it and Pico motion trackers, as well as just those products in general beyond just my hands-on impressions. So the end of the show will all be about Pico after we talk about Play for Dream.
Yeah, I am doing too much multitasking. It's overwhelming. I had a copy of the stream in the background there. I think I got rid of that. And I wanted to make a special shout out here this week to my niece, Alanis Hamilton, and her incredible performance at the U.S. Open Tennis Championships Juniors. They're in the other room right now, I believe, in my house, watching our YouTube stream, trying to understand why we do what we do. So I would love to hear in our audience where you're watching from, so we can let people know what a global audience there is for VR headsets. David, let's get into that first bit of news. Quest 3 is now used on Steam more than Valve Index, as well as the PSVR 2 headset appearing on the listing for the first time. That's a big change to mark in both categories. It's kind of the beginning of the next phase of Steam. Why don't you give those numbers and break it down a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. So Quest 3 launched back in October and it quickly surged up the Steam hardware survey to get to the position of number 3, which it's held for most of its life on the market. It was just behind Valve Index, and now in August's data, it has overtaken it for position number 2. So Meta headsets now make up number 1, 2, and 4. And if you break this out into kind of a chart that shows the market share per company, you can see that Meta headsets, which obviously includes older Oculus headsets as well, now make up 67.5% of Steam VR usage, beyond 2/3. But let's go back to that specific chart that shows this data broken out. It's actually remarkable that Valve Index has been where it's been for so long. This is a headset that is now 5 years old. It is there. If you look at Quest 2, it came out the year after. If you look at Rift S, that came out at the same time, it only has around half the usage. And Rift S used to be ahead of Valve Index. When these two headsets launched within a month of each other, Rift S spent most of the next few years ahead of it. But what's clearly happened here is that some Rift S owners have put theirs away and never use it again, and others have upgraded to Quest 2, Quest 3, perhaps Valve Index. You never know what they've exactly updated to. Meanwhile, Index owners have kept using their headset for years, and it seems that only now, recently, have we started to see people upgrade from Index. So some of them will have upgraded to Quest 3, some, a smaller percentage, will have upgraded to Big Screen Beyond, which you can see down here. Then separately, the other story here, as Ian pointed out, is that PlayStation VR 2 is showing for the first time. That's because the adapter to use it on PC launched at the start of August alongside Sony's Steam VR driver. So if you have a virtual link port on your graphics card, you don't need the adapter, but you do need Sony's driver. And so already it has gotten up to just below Big Screen Beyond. Now, depending on how you look at it, this is either a sign of the initial success of PlayStation VR 2 or a sign of just how niche Big Screen Beyond is. While we love to talk about it on this show, while enthusiasts love it, if you look at it on the Steam hardware survey on a market scale size, it's really not a significant headset in the market. That may change over time with future products if they can get the cost down, if they can add inside-out tracking, for example, to reduce the base stations. The big caveat I would say about PlayStation VR 2 is that anytime you see a headset launch in that month, the month's data will not include everyone who got it, right? Because some people will have been surveyed before they got their PlayStation VR 2 adapter, meaning they had it in the month, but when they were surveyed, they didn't. So we will look at this data very closely next month, September's data, to get a real indication of how well PlayStation VR 2 is being adopted on PC.
I'm seeing viewers out there from Pittsburgh, from Oregon, Mississippi, United Kingdom, Missouri. Thank you all for tuning in. Really, really cool to see everyone all over the world tuning in to see what's happening in VR. For those new viewers this week, including my own family watching in the other room, people who aren't familiar, this is the representation of all the PC headsets. And I love Big Screen Beyond here, right next to Sony PSVR 2. I went and hooked up the Big Screen Beyond again to try to get it up and running. I noticed that the audio strap for Big Screen Beyond, I believe Big Screen is trying to catch up on their orders for that, and I think they're there. And the audio strap and prescription lenses, I'm going to try to assess and look at again and get back into Big Screen Beyond. But it was really, really neat to sort of hook that up again. You talked about multitasking too much, and I'm doing that now in Quest. But when I think of PC-based headsets and all these PC-based headsets, they're the home of multitasking. There were multitasking started in headsets, and it was really, really cool to have all those windows up in Beyond again. And this is $1,000 headset. It requires laser base stations in the corner of the room, and it's like a mishmash of new and old technology. The thing that gets me about Big Screen Beyond, and we got to keep bringing it up as we go forward, is I'm starting to feel like they made assumptions and plans in this design for a little itty bitty headset that are going to play out over time. Like if what we're really seeing in the last few weeks in the show is going to play out, that Meta is going to choose a puck-based design over the long term. You put all your processing in a pocket, basically, or in a strap wearing you, and the wire runs up to your headset. If that really ends up happening, it's going to feel like Big Screen Beyond previewed the decisions being made by both Apple and Meta. And I think that's a significant thing to call out if that actually comes to pass. And it's expensive, and it's only able to get here on this list, but they could continue to move up along with the rest of these. So very interesting time to see these numbers and how they develop over time. Oculus Quest 2, right? It's going to start dropping off this list in the coming months, isn't it?
I think we'll probably see Quest 2 retain for quite some time because It's still on sale right now. It probably will stop being sold at Connect if the Quest 3S that we expect to come along and replace it does launch at Connect. But there's going to be a massive used market there, right? Those things are going to be going for $100, $150, that kind of range, maybe even lower for some of the older 64 gigabyte models. I think that thing is going to be on there for a very, very long time. And it may even be quite a while before Quest 3S gets up there. There's some people in the comments really wondering how quickly Quest 3S will shoot up here. That is the only headset on the horizon that we expect to actually make meaningful progress near the top of this list that's coming anytime soon, Quest 3S. Some people pointing out on the Sony side for PlayStation VR 2 that the adapter has been sold out. It doesn't look like Sony actually has made a significant number of those yet, or demand may just be big. That's something we will see quite clearly in the September data. I definitely agree with you on Big Screen Beyond's ethos, right? They have identified something that very few of these headsets really try to target, which is that for many of the people who either aren't in VR today or aren't spending a lot of time in VR today, one of the biggest barriers is weight. These things being a half a kilogram brick on your face will never go mainstream. The idea of a half a kilogram brick on your face will never go mainstream. But the technology is there to over time reduce that, both through advancements and through offloading, right? Offloading, as you mentioned, the battery like Apple Vision Pro, the compute in possible future headsets that Meta might be exploring reportedly for 2027. And yes, Big Screen has gotten there in terms of what they designed for first. They have this ethos of every gram matters. And yeah, the problem, of course, is that today they're delivering that in a way that costs $1,000 plus base stations, plus controllers, plus your PC. But the bigger companies are going to get there eventually in standalone form factors, and that could see Big Screen's ethos vindicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that aren't familiar, the Beyond takes a facial scan to get a custom fitted face mask that fits exactly your face shape. When Apple came out, they do some measurements on your face as well to tune that experience just for your head. Tuning the headset specifically for a specific face is another area that we like need to give credit to Big Screen Beyond for going out on a limb and doing that first, right before Apple went and followed suit. So, pretty big deal to have basically custom fitted eyewear.
Sure, but I wonder whether Apple's approach might be better. So, if you're not familiar, both these headsets, Apple Vision Pro on standalone and Big Screen Beyond on PC, have you use your iPhone's Face ID sensor to scan your face. The difference is that Apple then has, I think, 20 or so, the exact number doesn't matter, but they have that roughly that number of facial interfaces that attach to the headset and go against your face. So it picks which of those 20 are best for your face and gives you them. And if there's a problem, you can walk into an Apple store and they'll do a scan and you can try a few and see which one works. With Big Screen, they go more custom. They actually kind of mold the facial interface for your head, and they actually send you a headset with the lenses fixed at the distance of your eyes. Now, in theory, that's great. If you're the only person that's ever going to use it, being the major caveat there, you can't share it to other people, at least not comfortably. But in theory, if this is your personal headset, that's great. The problem that a lot of buyers have faced, and we've seen this on forums and social media, is that if that scan isn't perfect, if there was an issue during scanning and it wasn't picked up, you'll get a headset that actually doesn't fit your face. And then you have to go through the complicated returns process of sending this back to a startup and waiting weeks or even months at times to get one fixed for you. So, there's even like a headset they send out that does have adjustable IPD that you then have to, figure out which is right and then send them the value and then send it back to them. So it's a lot. It sounds great in theory, but there are a lot of logistical issues around that approach that make me wonder if what we might see is something like Apple's approach that's in between, a bunch of options, but not custom molded.
Yep. Very good overview there of why every gram matters. As Onokazi is bringing up, that's kind of the argument at Big Screen. They tried to shave all of the weight that they possibly can, and it's a very interesting, different idea that is important, right? I've got the headset fits in a can. You can put it in a can of, like a a can of Coke, right? Like it fits in that small of a can. And that's ridiculous to imagine how small that headset is compared to these face bricks that are everywhere else. And everyone out there that's watching VR from a distance doesn't realize really the headsets can get that small because all the headsets have been made with some of those other things as like reasons why they have to put everything in there, right? Like you, Big Screen made a whole lot of decisions to try to differentiate itself in the market. And the reason I pointed out where it is on this list is they did this as an indie dev, right? This is an indie startup company getting here. We've have other companies on this list, Pimax, that have done this over the years in various ways, and it's described like it's a similar situation. We've reported extensively in the past over the customer service situation. If you go and buy Pimax headsets, you're often left out in the cold with customer service. Big Screen is trying not to be that, even though we've seen the forum reports of people having difficulties with that. They are trying to be responsive and catch up and build a name for themselves in this market over the long term. How good they're going to achieve at that is going to be, we're going to have to pay attention and see how people are responding to those headsets. Let's see here. A lot of comments from our members. Thank you so much to you for supporting our work. It means an enormous amount to us. You can become a member directly at uploadvr.com, become a patron. I think you might even be able to donate to us directly in the near future. And all of those things mean an enormous amount to the journalists here doing work to cover this space as it grows by leaps and bounds. David, what do we want to talk about here before we move on?
Yeah, I think the last thing to note here is just how much has changed in terms of what kind of headsets attach to PC. So when you look at Valve Index and Rift S and HTC Vive and all of these headsets here, these are all essentially, monitors with cameras or monitors with photodiodes. These are things that attach to your HDMI or display port on your graphics card, and your PC is doing pretty much all the real compute. Whereas when you look at Quest 2 and Quest 3 and Pico 4 here and Oculus Quest and Quest Pro, these are all standalone headsets, computers that accept PC VR as a mode. PC VR is no longer a headset type, it's a mode, and that's a trend we will continue to see. Even the rumors of Valve's headset, which we don't have time to talk about today, but I'll just say in the context of even the rumors for that suggest that it's going to have, its own onboard compute and handle PC VR as just a mode. And that's what we expect with Quest 3S as well. And we will then get to a point where the vast majority of usage on Steam VR is just PC VR streaming, as we already are, right? We're already in that world where the vast majority of people are using these Quest headsets on PC.
Yeah, this chart is one of my favorites from David. He still refuses to make the blue bar a yellow bar so that this looks like Pac-Man as it slowly eats the VR market as Meta consumes everything from multiple sides. But what David just pointed out on the standalone idea, right? Every one of these or most of these, right? The sliver of these that are PC only headsets is shrinking. So there is some percentage of these that are Rift and Rift S. Those would be headsets that Meta shipped, years ago, years and years and years ago now. And they've since, ended those product lines and focused exclusively on the standalone form factor. But 67% of the market, with a vast majority of these being operated in standalone mode only. And then the remaining ones are the ones we see represented on this chart to be used in this PC mode that we get all this wonderful data out of. What's going to be really fascinating is, right, like maybe the era of wired dedicated headsets is shrinking and all these other ones is going down. But what's going to happen at the same time is all the standalone headsets that are on this chart, the vast majority of them are Meta headsets, right? You could have some HTC headset or standalone, HTC headsets that are standalone, some Pico headsets that are standalone. But for the most part, it's been Meta eating up the standalone VR market. And what we're about to see in the next phase is Meta trying to become the Windows of VR. They're going to try to release their Horizon operating system to a whole bunch of partners, including maybe Microsoft, because we haven't seen exactly how Microsoft's implementation is going to go. But a bunch of PC manufacturers are now going to be making Horizon OS headsets the same way that they used to make Windows-based PCs. So VR headsets are now open PCs that run Horizon OS, and that's the wave we're about to see, where those headsets are going to log on to this in two modes. Some of them are going to be in standalone, but some of them are going to log on to PC. And not all of those blue headsets are going to be Meta anymore, right? Some of them are going to be Meta powered, but they won't be from Meta.
Yeah, I still think we expect to see the Horizon OS headsets from partners like Asus and Lenovo be more niche, right? These are probably not going to be on the scale of Quest. The idea is that there are more and more use cases of VR and Quest headsets, and as the market expands, you do have this space start to open for more dedicated headsets for specific use cases. And Meta doesn't want to have to come out with a different edition of Quest for these use cases, so they let these other partners do it. But we don't have any indication that these companies plan anything mass market. It looks like Lenovo is going to be trying to maybe take the mantle of a Quest Pro and do something that's more orientated for productivity and work, while Asus, through their Republic of Gamers brand, ROG, may be doing something that's more for gamers, perhaps not like a Quest 3 Plus with eye tracking approach. But it looks like the jack of all trades will still be those Quests. But let's move on to talk about the next topic, so we can get through Meta's decision to kill its Spark engine. So this is going to happen on January 14th. And if you're unfamiliar, Spark Studio is Meta's engine for mobile AR. So it's what you use to build effects and filters for the camera inside Instagram, Facebook, and Messenger. And if you haven't used it before, these are not just limited to like face filters. You actually can build these little kind of AR mini experiences that can take place on like planes, as in the floor or table, and have some kind of basic interactivity. So the reason we're reporting on this is firstly that killing this essentially admits that mobile AR is dead, because you will no longer be able to build mobile AR experiences on Meta's platform. They don't even want to continue supporting that. And when Meta put out an FAQ to creators about this, they had a very interesting question. Most of them were just generic nonsense, but the interesting question here was in the FAQ: is Meta still committed to AR and the metaverse? And here's what they said. Definitely. Meta is committed to our long-term investments in new computing platforms that will bring us beyond today's 2D experiences on mobile. With the decision to shut down Meta Spark platform, we're also shifting resources to the next generation of experiences across new form factors like glasses. So what's clear to me here is that they are shutting down this engine, AR engine, to build something new that is designed to build AR experiences for Horizon OS, like Quest headsets, and eventually glasses. So originally, Spark, this engine, this platform, was actually going to be the way that Quest augments were built. And if you don't know what augments were, they were announced at Meta Connect alongside Quest 3 as being these persistent spatially anchored digital objects, essentially widgets for Quest 3. So when you're in your home environment today in Quest, and you can now have up to 6 2D panels, so those can be browser windows and Android apps, you're not actually inside a VR app. And the idea here with augments was, and perhaps still is on a different tech stack, that you can have these kind of 3D widgets that exist in your space, something as basic as a calendar, for example, that's pinned to your wall at all times, a photo frame that's on another wall, a portal to a specific game, and here's an example of like a mini game, just a basic pinball. And so these were going to be built in Spark using JavaScript as the scripting engine. But back in June or July, I believe, Meta's CTO said that these augments were going to be heavily delayed because the technical architecture, Spark, wasn't good enough, and that Meta went back to the drawing board. So that suggests that they're going to be building a different technology stack here to have augments on Quest, as well as apps for the AR glasses, because the information previously reported that Meta actually originally planned to use Spark not only for augments, but for the apps on AR glasses. And that plan would have allowed Quest headsets to be a kind of developer kit for AR glasses. But it looks like that this approach, this engine that was built for smartphones, was built for a 2D screen, was built for using JavaScript, just was not the right approach for either augments or the right approach for AR glasses.
Guy Godin, the creator of Virtual Desktop, piping up. He always seems to pipe up at exactly the time when David stops speaking, so that's why I call out your comments so often, Guy. It's running on JavaScript. No wonder it didn't make it. I like that comment, and I appreciated James' comment here that they probably weren't performant enough for augments, and after evaluating their engineering and future goals, decided to just rebuild the whole thing. And then I saw another commenter suggesting that it was to roll into Horizon OS. I want to ask this very broad question here of our audience, of Meta, of David here, just to get us thinking, right? When I look at Horizon OS, this operating system that Meta really still has yet to officially show off, right? Like they're still in a,
Well, I mean,
they're still calling it
it's just a,
V69
it's
of the previous Quest software.
Yeah, well, no, they call it Horizon OS. It's not something new, right? Some people seem to refer to Horizon OS as an upcoming product. It's just they just renamed the Quest OS and said it's going to be shipped in other headsets. That's all it is.
No, you're missing. You're jumping too quickly to what I'm saying. Like we're building. What happens here in the months ahead of Connect is Meta gets all of its ducks in a row. They reorganize the whole company. They send people to new teams. They get rid of people, which is apparently what they've been doing the last year or two a lot. But they restructure their teams. And then I've noticed this pattern when they come out at Connect, this developer conference near the end of the year, and they set the goals for the next year or two. But that's really hard for us as viewers, developers, creators, gamers, people who are using these headsets. Because what he's doing when he comes out at Connect is he's saying, I'm telling my teams in front of all of you right here, you guys go need to deliver on this, right? You need to go get this ready for you in the next year. But now we've got enough years into this, as VR viewers watching this who have seen the Connects over the years, going from Oculus to Facebook to Meta Connect, to going from Oculus to now Meta headsets. Like you can see the renaming and all this stuff. And here's the core question. Did Meta build an operating system that serves its needs, or did it build an operating system that serves users' needs first? Which is the highest priority in Meta's operating system when they actually debut it to the world? Is it the users, or is it Meta itself? And I want us to think about that as we see Meta unleash these things in the next few months. And it becomes really key when we think about this idea of augments and multitasking. For people that aren't aware, Apple Vision Pro came out earlier this year and has really good multitasking. It seems architected from the ground up to have multitasking at its core. My space, I have my space around me. It's my space to use as I please. And I put windows and objects around me however I want on the Apple Vision Pro and the Vision OS operating system that runs it. Over here on MetaQuest, we're about 7 months in after Vision OS has shipped. And I can position, as David, I think, pointed out, like 3 windows while multitasking in other apps and up to about 6 windows overall around my space. Well, one of the things I've noticed over even on the Vision Pro and Vision OS is if I pull up too many windows, the operating system picks a couple of the windows to not update as much as the other windows, or I've seen some of the windows stall. James O'Loughlin, I know you're a Vision Pro user. Let me know if you've ever noticed this, putting out too many windows out in front of you on the Vision OS operating system. Then it brings me to what David noticed in Pico. We'll have to talk about the multitasking experience in Pico separate to this. But what like coming out and saying your headset does multitasking, that you can have multiple windows up in place or multiple objects up in place, doesn't actually mean it does that really, really well and in real world use cases. So that's the core thing I wonder about when we see things like Horizon OS becoming like this always far off project for Meta. It was Horizon Workrooms, it was Horizon Worlds, and now it's Horizon OS. It feels like it's this container for all the lost, unready projects that Mark Zuckerberg still believes they're going to need long term, but they don't need right now. The question is, does that process produce the best operating system in the world for VR, and or does it not? Do you need a different approach to produce a great operating system for VR? And Augments, I think, is the place where we'll notice whether this works or not.
Yeah, for sure. As you point out, Vision OS, Apple's Vision OS, is really architected for multitasking. So right now, when Meta, and as we'll talk about later, ByteDance with Pico talk about multitasking, they mean 2D multitasking most of the time. They mean that you have, multiple 2D windows open. But Vision OS is the only headset so far, the only operating system that has really delivered on a fundamental architecture for 3D multitasking. And I don't just mean what Horizon OS can now do, where you can keep open a 2D window inside one immersive app. I mean running multiple 3D apps at the same time. So you have a chessboard on your table while you have, a globe beside you and another virtual pet beside you. Only Vision OS today can do that, because right now inside Horizon OS or Pico OS, as we'll talk about later, when you're bringing up three-dimensional content, that's one app entirely controlling the rendering process, opening as a siloed single application. And then, yes, you can put a 2D window in front of it, but it doesn't properly blend into the app, right? It will always display on front, even when you have a virtual object inside that app closer to you. That's a very kind of clunky approach to multitasking that still only allows one 3D app and some 2D apps. But Vision OS, in the shared space, Apple is controlling rendering. So the developers are only actually sending their models, their materials, their textures, and then Apple is doing the lighting and the interaction so that you can have multiple 2D apps and 3D apps all running in this shared space performantly. And I think that is what Meta wanted with Augments and still wants with Augments. It wants to deliver something akin to the Vision OS shared space, but in an operating system that fundamentally wasn't architected for that. You cannot do this by just having separate siloed Android apps. That's performantly not going to work, that are all basically running their own game engine, their Unity game engine. This is not going to work. For this to really work, it has to be one giant shared space game engine. On Vision OS, this is the shared space, which is basically its own app, right? So if you go into a full space in Vision Pro, like you play a full VR game like Job Simulator, then it's running just the same kind of way that a traditional VR app would on Quest or Pico. But when you're in the shared space, you're actually in one giant Apple app called the Vision OS shared space. And that's what Meta needs to deliver. It looked like Spark is not going to be the way they can do that. I'm very, very curious to see how they can, because whether Meta can do it or whether Google can with the upcoming Android XR is going to depend a big amount on which headset makers in the next few years decide to adopt. Because yes, Meta has their huge advantage of having all of these games on the Quest store, these exclusives. But when you go beyond gaming, when you start to talk about productivity and using these as general computers, that's when the kind of what's the word here? The burden of just being an Android fork starts to come in. Vision OS
Yes.
currently does some things that no Android fork can dream of right now, and Meta is going to have to make some significant changes to the OS to get anywhere near what Vision OS can do.
Yeah, I love that. So if you go back one episode on our channel to the last VR Games cast, it was kind of an unusual episode where I just put up some video of Puzzle Sculpt on Apple Vision Pro. That's Shell Games' new title out today on Apple Arcade. It is basically spatial Minesweeper, and I need to paint this picture for you. I tried to pull up the video. I couldn't seem to pull it up from the last Games cast. But this game is a full space mixed reality game. It doesn't share the space with any other apps, but it's incredibly responsive, and feels like an object in your space in ways that many, many other apps fail at. And what you've got is, imagine you've got this big block right in front of you, and it's broken up into cubes, and each side of a cube has a number on it that indicates how many of the blocks behind it in a row you want to keep. Okay, so it's basically Minesweeper, uh, but it's spatial, and it's like you're sculpting this object down into an actual object underneath it by figuring out where the empty spots are on this thing that need to be chipped away. Very, very interesting design. But you're reaching out with your finger and pinching exactly like I'm doing right now, and moving this 3D object that's floating in your space around you. So you're grabbing this object by its corner and moving it all the way around you in VR, just like it's this object. And then I'm doing all of these actions to the object, like a motion like this, pinching and then moving, actually deletes an entire row off of this object that's floating in front of me. The perfect operating system, the thing I want is this object. It could be cubism, it could be puzzling places, it could be a whole bunch of cool apps that don't need a whole ton of resources, but work in a very small space as a cool little thing. No one has figured out how do you manipulate all these little objects, this little thing right here, while also having your four other windows, while maybe also playing with an object over here. Why can't I have
What
one virtual object that I manipulate over here and another one right here?
hasn't Apple Vision Pro? Isn't that what Vision OS does?
So it does, but this app doesn't allow it, right? Like, so this app takes over your space. I want apps like in Vision Pro. I tend to not gravitate towards apps that don't share the space with others because of this very reason. Like, I'm finding myself really not buying or not being interested in the apps that take over your space completely on Vision OS.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it is this kind of weird experience where when you're in a full space app in Vision Pro, you're not in the shared space, you're in a full space. You actually can do pretty much no multitasking at all. It's actually worse than Quest, because on Quest, you can now bring up and even keep browser windows and other 2D apps in a full space. Every Quest app is a full space essentially, but you can't do that on Vision Pro. There is in Vision OS 2 like a developer option to keep your Mac virtual display open, but for the general users and currently in Vision OS, that's not something that's made available. I can't bring up Safari and Job Simulator in Apple Vision Pro, right? But I can bring up the Quest browser in Job Simulator on Quest. So it does seem that let's talk about why are developers ever using the full space then? The answer is because Apple limits what you can do in the shared space, not partially because it's just them trying to dictate the experience, but also for valid technical reasons that Apple has to do everything. The developer is kind of sending models and textures and dictating, when the user pinches here, send me an event. But Apple is actually doing all that. Again, the shared space is one giant app. So over time, what we could see with Vision OS is that the shared space gets more and more capabilities with each operating system release. We've seen in Vision OS 2, developers can build bigger volumes and have multiple volumes. That's what these are called, these volumetric experiences that run in the shared space. So you have windows and volumes being the 3D ones. Over time, Apple is going to expand what a volume can do. Eventually, we might even see entire fully immersive apps of the style of Job Simulator be able to be built with volumes in the shared space. That's what we're going to have to see over the long term, but that's going to take time, right? Because something that is built as a fully immersive VR app is being built in Unity or on Unreal, which are these engines that have had now decades of development time to build up all of these feature sets and capabilities. The developer is able to run, raw C# or C++ code and do whatever they want and have full control. And so to add all of those capabilities so that developers don't need to go back and just do this in their own engine, Apple is going to have to build out its engine, because what's actually powering this in the shared space is Apple's own engine. They do have their own engine. It's called Reality Kit. You have an engine editor as well in Reality Composer Pro. So Apple will have to expand Reality Kit and Reality Composer Pro to basically over time encompass the features of Unity. And as people are pointing out in the comments, I think, Quentin, it's amazing that Meta hasn't done this for years. Meta has been content to be completely dependent on Unity, which creates this completely just disjointed experiences between different applications, which means that when a new feature is released across the OS or a new technology, you have to wait for each individual developer to go and download the newest version of the Unity integration and implement it. A terrible ecosystem coherence. Meta could have started 10 years ago to build their own engine like Reality Kit and Reality Composer. And it could be today this, fully fledged competitor to Unity. But as we've seen time and time again, Meta just doesn't want to commit to these very, very long-term projects. They spin up an idea, and then the grad who came on and started it gets bored and leaves for a different company in 18 months, and then a new executive comes along and it's their new idea and they don't like this project, so they start it over again and rinse and repeat until you get to the point where in 10 years of being in this market, Meta has almost no software that's over 2 or 3 years old somehow. And yeah, it's a massive, massive missed opportunity that looks like with Augment and this new approach, Meta is going to start scrambling to do it. But it's amazing to think that Meta is acting like a company that's just arrived in this market when they've been here for 10 years, and they could have had their own approach to this. They could have had true 3D multitasking. They chose to leave it all to Unity on Unreal in what I think will be considered in the future a massive strategic blunder.
I was trying to get ready for, it sounds like David and I are at the same place. But I missed what David was saying a little bit there. But I'm in the same place thinking about this and why it's so important. And I think we're going to come back to this a lot on our show, because take this a step further to think about what we actually need, what we don't have in VR. There's no desktop in VR. There's no equivalent of moving objects around your space and having them go to different apps. Like, you can't have an object right here that's accessible to 3 different apps at the same time. And there's no way to take a product from this app over here and put it into this app over here in almost, even in Vision OS. It's still it's still going into a file format like process. There's no like object manipulation going from app to app. It's still clunky. Feels like Vision OS is ready to have that flow, though, go from one, like from capture to device to device. Like it's not. Yeah, sorry. There's a lot to think about there, but there's no VR equivalent of desktop file management. There's no spatial file management right now, and I wonder how that's going to play out over time. Meta is very invested in you throwing as much of what you do on their headset into their server farm. And I don't think that's the right model for the way people use their media at home. There's too many people who care too much about their local files to have that model of everything get thrown into the Dropbox folder really, really succeed, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can see Vision OS eventually getting there, right? So you kind of do have some sort of proto versions of this where someone can send you a 3D file on iMessage, and then you can pull that out into the shared space. And if you're on a FaceTime call with someone, they can see it. Theoretically, apps can kind of accept that. You can see this 3D file sharing thing being a part of Vision OS in the shared space. Again, that massive caveat. When it comes to Horizon OS, Quest headsets, it's not a matter of Meta wanting to do things on the server. It's just, again, Quest apps are completely siloed Android apps running their own instance of Unity, doing everything on their own. Everyone is reinventing the wheel over and over again, every single app. It's just technically not how it's architected. They would need to have a completely different technical architecture for apps.
As an example of my, so I noticed in WhatsApp, there's a really slick way now on Quest I found where you could take your video that you've captured on a Quest headset and just hit send to yourself on WhatsApp. You just go you get a little like sheet that pops up just like it might on Android or on iOS, and it says, where would you like to send this? I click WhatsApp, send to self, and boom, I have the video on my phone a second later. that video went through Meta's servers in order to get to my phone, whereas a AirDrop is a device-to-device anywhere in the world connection. It's again, I'm not saying one route is necessarily better than the other, but there are dramatically different routes to the same sorts of functionality playing out right in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has just been a problem with mobile devices for a while, right? There's these separate standards for local sharing. Right now, if you have like an Android phone, there only just in the last few years has been this nearby share protocol from Google that allows you to share to your PC. But annoyingly, Microsoft has its own nearby share, and I think Samsung has its own and only recently adopted Google's. And obviously, then Apple has had AirDrop for a very long time. I don't think this is unique to headsets and glasses. It would be amazing to see the industry come together and consolidate AirDrop and nearby share into a universal share. Imagine that no matter what operating system or ecosystem you're in, you could just send a file to someone. That would be great. But again, this is a larger issue in the industry.
No, it's funny. You're describing it, David, right? Like if I'm walking, I should be holding files in my hands, right? They should be floating above my hands. That's what we've seen in science fiction. It's what we kind of naturally imagine ourselves doing in VR. And I should be able to like hold that file in my hand and you grab it, right? And get a copy or whatever. Like it should work like that, and it won't yet.
Yeah, and there's no reason Vision OS couldn't do that already if you're in a spatial persona call in the shared space, right? There's no reason that couldn't happen. Um, yeah, I actually Apple could add that in Vision OS 3 with minimal effort. You're already in an entirely Apple app when you're picking up a model in the 3D space, regardless of which app brought that model into your space. Apple has full, information and control and metadata for that object. That's something that could be done. Are we ready to move on to our next topic?
Yep, I think we covered the main things that were relevant there. Before we talk about this next one, the Surreal Touch 6DoF track controllers, David, why don't you break us down where this product is?
Sure. And there's just one audience question I want to answer first. So this is going to be our last topic before we get into those two Chinese headsets. And Teo EXE in the comments, you seem to have confused these two headsets. So our headline, our title for this video is actually two separate topics. Pico 4 Ultra is not the Vision Pro clone. The Vision Pro clone is a separate headset from Play for Dream. And it's coming to the US. Pico 4 Ultra is not. So those are going to be two separate headsets we talk about after this topic first. This topic being Surreal Touch. So as I said in the introduction, for a lot of traditional VR users, and especially obviously VR gamers, the biggest missing feature in Apple Vision Pro is its input, its lack of traditional gaming style touch-like controllers. And that's what this Kickstarter aims to address, right? This is something that was announced back in June and we covered, but they've now launched their Kickstarter. They have it fully funded. They've released the pricing and they've released their release date target. So they claim that this thing is going to ship in December, which is really quite soon to now. And they are going to have a retail price of $370. But if you back their Kickstarter, they claim you can get a price between $250 and $318. So quite a significant discount there. We're going to say the thing we say about all Kickstarters to start here, which is that legally a Kickstarter pledge is not a pre-order. You're backing a project, and for a reward if it succeeds, legally they don't have to give you anything. So this is not a pre-order. Only back this if you're okay with your money going into a pit and never getting the product. Now that out of the way, it really does look like these could be a major game changer for Vision OS, because not only is this for Steam VR, right? They have their Surreal Link app, which is a fork of ALVR, the tool that Vision Pro owners are already using to connect to Steam VR. So they have a fork of this that allows you to pair these controllers and passes them through to Steam VR. So there's no base stations here. There's no manual setup. They automatically calibrate by looking at your hand tracking, comparing where your hands are holding the controller. You just pair them by Bluetooth and you jump into Steam VR. But in addition to that, they're also working on a native SDK for Vision OS. And they say they're working with multiple studios to bring apps to the Vision OS App Store that support these controllers. So we could see standalone VR gaming with track controllers arrive on Vision Pro from very early next year. And they claim that they're working with studios behind sword fighting, table tennis, fishing, golf, and boxing VR games. And they've specifically confirmed that they have seeded developer kits to the developers of Contractors and Grimlord. So those are two big VR games. Those developers have had great things to say about these controllers, saying that the tracking works. The company here, Surreal Link, has shown this being used to beat Saber tracks on expert mode. So they haven't shown expert plus, but they have shown expert. And I spoke to this founder, and they do have a verified experience working on computer vision at DJI, the drone company. They worked on their computer vision robotics team. They have computer vision engineers on their team from Waymo self-driving car project, as well as some of Google's AR team, so former employees from there. And these are like Touch Pro controllers, to be clear. They have two cameras on the front, and they're doing independent inside-out tracking, self-tracked, hence the price of $370 at retail. And yeah, unless there's some massive caveat here, I'm looking forward to these. We will be getting a review unit when they become available, and we will tell you whether the tracking is good. But so far, we're hearing from developers, such as the Contractors developers, that these are real and the tracking is good.
So I think our audience and you know what I'm going to bring up. Sorry for those of you who have a drinking game going. We don't encourage that. We do not suggest you take drinks when we say certain things in this show. Joy-Cons, David, can you tell me how each operating system handles split track controllers as emulated gamepads? Is it the same across the board to use tracked controllers as a gamepad in a flat screen game, or is there a difference from Steam VR to Pico to Quest?
Yeah, so it depends on how you're doing it, right? On Steam VR, you have input mapping, so you can map your touch controllers or whatever you're using to gamepad actions. So this is if you're using Steam VR Theater to play a traditional flat screen game. On Horizon OS, it depends how you're doing it, right? Virtual Desktop from Guy Godin, who I think is in our comments, will let you play your traditional PC games on a giant virtual screen using touch controllers. Obviously, the one thing touch controllers do lack is a D-pad, so you're going to want to connect a gamepad for the full experience there. I'm actually not 100% sure how Xbox Cloud Gaming does it, which is the other way to play 2D games on Quest. They recommend you pair a real gamepad for that. And Apple Vision Pro has full support for a two-handed gamepad for Xbox controllers, PlayStation controllers, and they use that for multiple reasons. The first is native apps, so you have iPad games that are played on a giant virtual screen, or Steam Link, where you connect to your PC. This is the traditional Steam Link, not the VR one, to play, again, your games on a giant virtual screen. But there are no, track controllers for Vision Pro until this, so we don't know how that's going to work in that respect.
Yeah, so I'm having trouble getting excited for this product, even though it seems like everyone in our audience wants to know how it holds up. You were very careful to point out that we haven't seen Expert Plus. We haven't tried it ourselves. We're going to try to get all those things for you. And we always point those things out to our audience so that people in our audience can make up their own minds whether they want to risk something or wait for us to give an assessment and actually go hands-on with these things. But I went there to the Joy-Cons and I went there to the track controllers because I've been a mess this year, going back and forth between loving my track controllers and hating my track controllers because they are right in between the solution I need and want with me all the time, right? Like that's why I've been talking about the Joy-Cons incessantly with this audience, why it's a running joke, because you can get the strap for your wrist, get them out of the way, bring them up into your hand and have really poorly tracked controllers because it's tracking your hands, not the actual controllers. Well, this is the solution we need or want. The most recent experiment, it was really cool because I did that experiment with Raspberry Pi 400 as a personal computer in VR. Get a nice big 1080p screen right in front of me, my files sitting inside the Raspberry Pi, and I've got a keyboard right in front of me here, a little mouse hooked into the keyboard. It's a really neat little setup. But what's missing in that setup is it doesn't have all the benefits of the track keyboard that happens inside of the Quest OS. And what would be a great solution for that is mounting each of my Quest 3 controllers to the sides of the keyboard, just having little mounts on the sides of the track of the keyboard to put and store the controllers when they're not in use, so that I can get back to typing on my keyboard and then just pull your controllers out and now I'm playing Beat Saber or whatever, put the controllers back in the thing and I'm back into typing mode. That would be the ideal kind of use case for me. But there's no lineup here between software and hardware and this thing I'm talking about where track controllers are only good in games that are made for VR, whereas in many games for like gamepad games, they're not. They're like a second run solution. You have to go bind things over in Steam VR and the other operating systems. This is building to something. I got fighty words from you months and months and months ago. How does Meta evolve its operating system to support gamepads and hand tracking and track controllers? And what does that mean for the developers over the last 5 years who built games exclusively for track controllers being used in a single way? What happens when they open the operating system to the Joy-Cons and the untracked gamepads for other use cases?
It already does. Horizon OS Quest headsets have supported gamepads for years. I think since Oculus Go, which was 6 years ago now, and it supported hand tracking since Quest 1. Developers could always have built games for gamepads if they wanted to.
So let me take to the next question. Let me go to the next question. What happens when more people use gamepads with their Quest headsets than tracked controllers? What does that mean for the makers of the games that only relied on the track controllers?
Well, I mean, the premise of the question is flawed, right? Every Quest comes with touch controllers. A gamepad is something you buy after. Meta already is pushing Xbox Cloud Gaming, right, with that partnership with Microsoft. They recommend you go and get a gamepad for that. Many people already have a gamepad lying around. But, I think the comment I have to agree for here is Quinton M. Ian, this is the product for you. It's time to move on from the Joy-Cons, right? You've wanted from day one. Your question from day one of Apple Vision Pro has been, how do I use this to play games on Steam? And the answer has been, without a bunch of hacks that make it, suboptimal, you really can't. And this product changes that. It means for, $250 if you're a Kickstarter backer, or $370 afterwards, you just buy these things and you just pair them via Bluetooth to your Vision Pro, and boom, you connect to your PC and play Steam VR. This is the answer to your question. You don't need to come up with all of these crazy workarounds, because there's a product for it now.
And I will be waiting desperately for David's hands-on report before I believe that, right? Like, so I'm as I'm in the crowd with everyone else, waiting until they ship these to David to believe whether what David just suggested these things could be are actually true. So I can't wait to see what David thinks of these as soon as we actually get real hands-on time with him. Because you're right, and you're absolutely right. This is what I want. I'm just skeptical of it. I want it to deliver, and I want it to deliver across the board. I need. What we're talking about here is an explosion in input devices that have been opened to standalone VR headsets this year. Keyboards, mice, trackpads, gamepads, track controllers, MacBooks, they're all trackable devices. And then the operating systems themselves, Vision OS, is letting developers add tracked objects to their next apps so that you'll have even more tracked objects. And I only want to...
Not moving.
Oh, not moving. Okay, interesting. Yeah, all right, I messed that one up. But the point is that you're going to want to take devices with you to use in association with your VR headsets. How many are you going to take with you into what scenarios, right? I have a small bag. It's already going to stuff a big VR headset into there. What do I stuff into the VR headset, or into the bag with the VR headset to use it? I don't want to take a gamepad and controllers. It's the whole thing all along that I've been trying to say. How do I get the benefits of both at the same time without having to take both with me everywhere?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The one thing I would say is these controllers now, if you asked this question a few years ago when you had these big rings on the Quest 2 controllers or your giant Valve Index controllers, or even if you're a PlayStation VR 2 owner, not that you would be carrying that around portably, this would be a very different question. But now in this era, as we'll talk about with Play for Dream and Pico, and obviously already with Quest 3, these are very small controllers, right? These things can fit in between the visor and the backstrap of your headset in a very small case. And I think a lot of the time the answer is going to be you bring along a gamepad as well. But it's a very interesting idea to think about. Imagine a slot that your touch controllers could slot into, and then maybe add the D-pad so you actually can put these things into one giant controller. That's a product that someone is waiting to make. I'm sure it's a open space for any accessory companies that wants to come along and use this. Just want to answer a question here from Nicholas Johansson. Will these have any use for Apple Vision Pro in standalone mode? It's purely for PC VR. No. So you may have missed the start of this segment where I said they actually do have a native OS or a native SDK for Vision OS. So their plan here, they claim that there are going to be dozens of Vision OS App Store games that support these, not through your PC, even if you don't own a PC, on the actual Vision OS App Store. And I'll read out that quote again. They say, sword fighting, table tennis, fishing, golf, boxing are existing VR games have these as development kits and are working on this right now. And specifically, as I said at the start, the developer of Contractors has come out and said that they have these things and they like them. And they haven't confirmed any plans, but it's like reading between the lines. Could we see Contractors on Vision Pro with these sometime next year? That's not been announced, but if you have the developer of this game, coming out and making a statement, that's something that we could actually see over time. And I think that's why these could be so significant, right? The fact that this is a native SDK for Vision OS, you could actually see this product turn Vision Pro into a traditional VR gaming headset. And not just Vision Pro, obviously, but the future cheaper Vision headset as well that could actually allow this to take on Quest without Apple doing anything. Just for the fact that Apple has allowed custom Bluetooth devices on Vision OS, this entirely emerges.
Yeah, I'm appreciating the comments. People are saying, complaining about the acronym AVP. People hearing Alien versus Predator when they see that. I specifically do not write AVP anywhere specifically to avoid that from happening. I write it out as Apple Vision Pro almost every time. I also call it Apple VR. I'll go out on a limb there and be the jerk who this headset, the Apple Vision Pro headset, I've named it Apple VR so that when I log in on other devices and try to stream the screen or whatever, it always says I'm trying to pull Apple VR into other places, and it's accurate, darn it.
I think the biggest problem with the AVP acronym is what do you do when the future headsets come out? If there's Apple Vision Air, are you going to call that one AVA? If it's just Apple Vision, is it now AV, the generic term, for audio visual, and has a bunch of other different usages? That it just doesn't scale in that sense, right? And then every time you search for something like Apple Vision in future, you're not going to see articles that said AVP because you're going to be searching for Apple Vision Air or Apple Vision or Vision OS. I just think it's really not that hard to say Apple Vision Pro. And if you really want to shorten it, just say Vision Pro. Everyone's going to know what you mean. Or even just Vision OS, because we're still in the stage where the real product here is the operating system. This is just the kind of early expensive hardware that developers and early adopters are using with Vision OS.
Thank you to Biggs for your support as a member. Reading off one of their comments here. No way people are carrying multiple devices. So few carry their phone and a gamepad. They just play with touch. And I've got video, I think, on our channel of me playing that was a Crossy Road type game or castle game where you've got your thumb as the D-pad left and right. And I think it was just pinching over here to jump. And that's it. That's That's Back to the Future 2 from the 1980s with a young Frodo Baggins telling everyone that you have to use your hands, being an absurd idea. That's it. It's there. And all the gamers in our audience are going to get really, really, really mad at the degradation of their pastimes, from mouse and keyboard to gamepad to now open air doing this, right? It seems like a destruction of their childhood to imagine it like going to the least common denominator. But I think it's a mistake to not realize that, okay, if this is bare minimum input, it only gets better when you start adding physical inputs on top.
Yeah, so I think probably the solution to this is that when you're traveling around, you're going to be, sitting on a plane, sitting on a train, sitting in a hotel room. You're probably going to just bring your gamepad, right? Because you're going to be playing traditional 2D games or seated games that allow for that. You're probably not going to bring your touch controllers because the majority of games that you're going to be playing with track controllers are going to be oriented around, standing up in room scale, and that's probably not what you're going to be doing traveling anyway. Mr. Mycelium asks, have any interesting apps come out for Apple Vision Pro in the past few months? Every time I hear about Apple Vision Pro, it doesn't seem like much is going on in the ecosystem. So we do try to report on some of that. And I think Ian will have an article later today or perhaps tomorrow on a very interesting new game that just came out that he was talking about earlier in the show. Am I right about that?
Yeah, Puzzle Sculpt. Go check out the Puzzle Sculpt video that's already on our channel, showing off some of the gameplay there. As I was kind of explaining how it works, it's like spatial minesweeper. And I mean, if you've ever spent, if you're the type of person who spent hours in Minesweeper, you could find yourself spending hours in Puzzle Sculpt because it is very, very close to that experience. And like, there's certain people in our audience who are just like, nope, right? That is very far away from the type of game they want. Whereas other people, that is exactly the type of game they want. So I think that's a very, very interesting one. I would go check out What If you haven't checked out What If yet from Disney. That is a must watch, in my opinion.
Yeah, so let's go on to talk about our last two topics. These two Chinese headsets with very different visions of the future. Not that different, just different kind of levels of hardware. The first we'll talk about is Play for Dream MR, and the second we'll talk about is Pico 4 Ultra. So let's start with Play for Dream MR. This is a headset that was announced back in June as coming to China and some of the nearby countries, I think Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand. Um, and we had no idea whether it was going to come to the West. And now they've just launched today a Kickstarter. You can get some information on uploadvr.com about this, that is going to bring this to, they say, anywhere in the world, which is remarkable. I always wonder this, where you see these Western companies go through so painstaking certification to go to each specific new country. You have like 22 countries for MetaQuest headsets. I think Apple Vision is now in 9 countries. And then some Chinese company just says, yeah, put in a shipping address. We'll ship it anywhere in the world. It does seem to be one rule for them and one rule for the others. But that's the way it is. And that's their plan here for Play for Dream MR. And if you haven't heard of this before, if you didn't catch our earlier show a few months ago that was reporting on this, it's basically a Vision Pro clone that also integrates some design aspects from Quest Pro. So it has this front visor that looks very, very similar to Apple Vision Pro, has the same kind of sensor suite for pass-through mixed reality, and tries to hide everything under a kind of glass front plate, but doesn't have a front display, to be clear. But like Quest Pro, it has a rear battery, and it also has controllers, like VR style controllers that we've just been talking about out of the box. Now, interestingly, its battery here is only able to power it for around 1 hour at a time. So what it does to go for longer than that is has a Vision Pro style external battery. So you could technically not use that external battery and just use this thing for 1 hour at a time. But if you do want to use it for extended periods, you're going to have both. You're going to have a battery on the back of your head and a battery in your pocket. And so that really shows the power demands of a product like this. And so this should be, assuming the Samsung headset doesn't magically launch sooner, the first headset to use Qualcomm's XR2 Plus Gen 2 chipset. That is a higher end version of the chipset that is in Quest 3 and Pico 4 Ultra. It's got higher CPU and GPU clocks. And if I can bring up the graph, I'll be able to show you exactly how much higher, if I can find it here. And so the other thing this headset has is 4K micro OLED displays. It's in that sense, it's not like a Quest Pro where it only has these sub 2K LCDs. It is a full-fledged sort of spatial computer with 4K OLEDs, 16 gigabytes of RAM, more than Pico 4 Ultra, double that of Quest 3. It's got half a terabyte of storage in the base option, and it has a 1 terabyte storage option. It's got eye tracking, hand tracking, a depth sensor. They claim the weight of the front visor is just around 300 grams, which is a lot lighter than Quest 3 and Vision Pro. This is a very interesting headset. So here's the graph I was speaking about using the XR2 Plus Gen 2 chipset. And they're going to price it at retail, they say, at $2,000. And if you back it on their Kickstarter, they claim you can get it for as low as $1,200, depending on how early you back. But we will again point out the same thing we pointed out for Surreal Touch was it's the Kickstarter is not a pre-order system, and there is no guarantee you will get it. Just before I stop speaking, William Archer has asked, I missed what headset this is. This is Play for Dream MR. Play for Dream MR. It's a Chinese headset company that is already established in China. It used to be called YVR. With this, they are now swinging for the high end, going for a downright Vision Pro and Quest Pro competitor. And the news here is that previously we thought it was going to stay in China and neighboring countries, but they are now launching it everywhere in the world via Kickstarter, they say.
I think I'm seeing people getting upset about all the R's, the different types of MR, XR terms that everyone is using. I saw people referring to Apple and going off on my Apple VR thing. I have to just mention it. VR headsets are a common architecture of Meta and Apple as they approach spatial computing across the board. So you've got previous efforts like Magic Leap, HoloLens. Those things are whittling away, trying to make markets of business or perhaps even military use for their devices that are many thousands of dollars with future-facing optic systems, whereas VR headsets cost as low as a couple $100. And I want to, I saw people talking about, what was this comment? Where is it? Someone talking about their games. Yeah, Jack saying playing Minesweeper, Solitaire, and Pinball was what I used to call being at work. I want to go back to that previous thing I was talking about. Imagine my Raspberry Pi that I was talking about keyboard. It's a computer in a keyboard. Now imagine game controllers of some kind mounted to the side of the keyboard, such that they slide in and lock in, maybe like the way they do onto a switch or onto a docking mechanism. And then you've got this as a tracked object, and you've got buttons on the side of each keyboard to flip left and right like a pinball machine, a tracked pinball machine. You move the pinball machine a little bit around, it repositions right in front of you, and you've got buttons on either side of the keyboard. I just wanted to put that idea out there for anyone who is desperate for pinball in VR. I feel like you can get the buttons on the side of a keyboard pretty effectively, and I want that yesterday, so please someone deliver it. David, I want to get to this last subject here soon. Why should people be excited about this when it's just a Kickstarter?
So it doesn't look like they're using this as a Kickstarter in the traditional sense. They are launching this in China and the nearby countries, regardless of the Kickstarter. This is for the global rest of the world. They've also set their goal as $5,000, which is ridiculous, right? A couple of people back this and that's crossed. I think they're using Kickstarter just for marketing and generate hype, and as a sales channel, which is what we've seen some Chinese companies do in the past. The idea being that the people who first back this thing are going to be the enthusiasts. They're going to then rave about it to other people, especially since they got it for a discounted price and early. And then they have this kind of organic marketing system that builds around it. So this is interesting as a piece of hardware, right? This is pretty much everything we expected a 2024 Quest Pro 2 could have been. Reportedly last year, the 2024 Quest Pro 2 was cancelled. You may not even remember that was ever on the cards, but it was. There was at some time there was going to be a 2024 Quest Pro 2, according to reliable reports from Meta's roadmap. And so this thing has that hardware, right? It's got your 4K OLED micro displays. It's got your eye tracking. It's got a rear battery and external battery. It has very high resolution front pass-through cameras. And it's got that chipset, the highest end chipset that you can get if you're making a headset that isn't Apple. But one thing I want to just talk about is actually how much of a shameless Vision Pro clone this is in some ways. And I've got a video I can kind of bring up here if it will play. It probably will, but maybe it won't. Let's give it a few seconds. Regardless, if you look at UploadVR.com, you can go into the article and see this video where they show their software concept. And it's really crazy. They have shamelessly copied Vision OS's style. Their marketing is designed to look exactly like Vision OS. The one thing that they can't do, though, is have you lie back in a seat or a bed in the way you can in an Apple Vision headset. Because with this rear battery, you're always going to have that sort of bulk shift the headset and annoyingly make that really impractical. And so you see in their marketing video, this idea of using it on a plane, just like Vision Pro, where you have your virtual cinema screen on a plane. Well, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable to push a big battery into the back of a plane like this. That's one of the big problems with this design, and it may be why Meta has reportedly ditched the idea of their own Quest Pro 2. From a software perspective, though, that's going to be the big question here. This thing is probably going to do the classic Chinese approach of try to jam every possible feature in there. But the question is, to what quality will those features be? This will be a Vision OS clone, but how good will it be at cloning Vision OS?
Yeah, so Guy Godin, repeating what we always say to our audience here, people have to remember with Kickstarters that you are basically giving money away and are not entitled to anything. Very important to keep in mind with all Kickstarters, and we try to repeat that every single time they come up. I generally think of them as interesting ideas that I tend to wait until someone I know and trust actually goes hands-on with the product. And even then, I still am skeptical because the hands-on isn't necessarily the same as delivering on the product. So I think it's time to move on here soon to our final subject, where David has hands-on impressions with Pico 4 Ultra and the Pico motion trackers. A pretty big deal to go hands-on with those. Lots of people are going to be curious about them in our audience. Before we get into that section, I do want to remind people to like and subscribe, and also share this link out to others who might be curious about VR for the first time. Things like Pico are completely new to every single person right now. They have no idea what headset to buy, why to buy it, what's useful. I think I wanted to bring up this example before we move over to the last subject, just to give people something to think about here about the space. David, what is the Apple Vision Pro developer strap, and how much does it cost?
Yeah, the Vision Pro developer strap is what you need to actually connect a wired device to Vision Pro, but USB. Vision Pro doesn't have any ports, any wired ports, I should say. It obviously does have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And I think it costs $300, if I remember correctly.
So yeah, that's what I was looking for. So we expect the USB port on an Apple Vision Pro to cost the same as a Meta Quest 3S. So I want you to think about that comparison as we go into the future. The different positions and the different priorities at play there in how these companies are rolling things out. It's actually a masterful play in my mind to think about how how much more useful Meta Quest 3 is to me right now than it was back in February of this year because of how much Meta has relied on the USB port and what you can do with it. All the magic. You can hook up a hub, you can bring an HDMI link, and it's opened up an entire array of devices for headset use that are more expensive or more difficult to use on an Apple Vision Pro. So I love that pricing comparison, right? A USB port for an Apple Vision Pro is roughly the price of a Meta headset. Let's get into Pico, David. What is going on with Pico 4 Ultra?
Sure. So we just talked about one Chinese company that's trying to take on Apple Vision Pro. Now we're going to talk about another that is trying to take on Meta Quest 3, and that is Pico. It's owned by ByteDance, if you're not aware, ByteDance being the same company that owns TikTok. So the company behind Facebook and Instagram brings you Quest headsets, and the company behind TikTok brings you Pico headsets. And Pico 4 was already a product out there. It came out between Quest 2 and Quest 3, and it was essentially a slap bang in the middle of Quest 2 and Quest 3 specs wise. And now with Pico 4 Ultra, they are bringing out a headset that is supposed to be slightly above Quest 3 in specs, but we'll talk about how that actually pans out in the experience very soon. The difference here, the biggest difference for a lot of you in the audience, is that this is not coming to North America. They have launched it already in China, and on Friday, that's tomorrow, they are opening pre-orders for Europe and some of the Asian countries such as Japan and South Korea and Singapore. So Asia Pacific and Europe. And this thing comes in price between the two Quest 3 models. So it's more expensive than the 128 gigabyte Quest 3, but not as expensive as the 512. And interestingly enough, this has 256 gigabytes of storage. So it's slap bang in the middle. The other product that they've announced alongside this thing is the Pico motion trackers. And the Pico motion trackers are actually a great complement to this, but they also work with Pico 4 and the previous headset, Pico Neo 3. And what they do is that they add leg tracking. You strap these things to your ankles, as I did when I tried them, and kaboom, pretty much no setup. You just look down at your ankles and it's done. You now have leg tracking in games. This is something that people have been asking Meta for a very, very long time, but Pico is delivering it. And not only are these leg trackers, but these can actually be, as we reported earlier today on UploadVR.com, general object trackers. So these things can pop out of their ankle mounts and be attached to any object you want. And developers in enterprise and location-based entertainment, I'm sure will have many uses for this, especially because these things for a pair cost only €90. So you're getting these for €45 each, essentially, which is a lot cheaper than Vive trackers. You don't need any base stations. And the USB-C port that charges these things and gives them 25 hours of active battery life also passes through data, and they have an API to make doing that data pass through easy. So you can as a enterprise company or a location-based entertainment venue, build your own VR controller of whatever shape and configuration you want, add triggers and buttons and even haptics, and then just pop one of these little things on, and it's now a tracked controller from these Pico headsets. That, I think, is a remarkable feature. It's really something we haven't seen any company deliver on with that level of simplicity. And so before we even talk about the headset, I just wanted to point out that these things are the star of the show, right? I tried them and they work, and we'll talk about that soon. But the fact that not only can you, for €90, get leg tracking, but also then use these for any object you want. This is a remarkable product, these Pico trackers, before we even get into talk about the headset.
Yeah, I think we are going to have to see whether Meta tracks legs officially with a tracked accessory. I always wonder when you see a company announce products a week or two prior to some other company announcing products, it's always a red flag in my mind to wait for the other company to make its announcement before buying into that ecosystem. So I want to throw that out there to anyone thinking of buying into this right now. Maybe just take a breather and see what Meta and Google, for that matter, announce in the next 2 months.
Sure, that's valid, but we have seen Meta CTO Andrew Bosworth being asked about this in Instagram Ask Me Anything sessions in the past, and he's essentially said, look, we don't want to have a solution where you have to go out and buy a separate accessory and strap it to your body, and then only developers will only support those in certain games. It just looks like this isn't mass market enough for Meta. Meta, for better or for worse, Meta's focus is on what is going to get the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 million people into VR, not what do the current enthusiasts want. And so these other companies are going for kind of smaller slices of the market. And that means that unfortunately you don't get that. Now, we have seen Meta partner with Logitech for tracked objects, right? We've seen the Logitech MX Ink is going to be launched at Connect, that tracked stylus. So it's possible that a company might come out and build one of these and then get Meta to support it in Horizon OS. That's something we'll keep an eye out on for Connect. For now, though, this is something that works on Pico, and they have managed to get support for this in VR chat. So if you have a Pico 4 Ultra or a Pico 4 and get these things, you can download VR chat from the store and standalone on the headset with just these €90 trackers on your ankles, have body tracking. They're also supporting it in Drunken Bar Fight, and most significantly for kind of gamers, I think, Blade and Sorcery Nomad has committed to supporting this, as well as any PC VR app that today supports Vive trackers. So you use the Pico Connect PC VR streaming app, and then you can use these on PC with any Vive trackers and any apps that support Vive trackers. To be clear, the reason that these can be used for tracked objects and the reason that these will work with only 2 trackers, unlike other things like Sony's Mocopi, is that these things actually have IR LEDs in them, not just accelerometers. So underneath the plastic here, you have little IR LEDs. Essentially what these things are little mini controllers without the buttons, thumbsticks, and triggers, right? They are literally the same concept of an IMU, accelerometer and gyroscope, plus some IR LEDs, but just put into a little puck. So let's actually just talk about them first. This is a strange order to do this in, but let's talk about the experience of those first. Now, I have only had a short amount of time hands-on with them. I will have a review unit very shortly to bring you a full review. You can read my initial impressions on UploadVR.com. Here are my ankles with the Pico motion trackers on. The first thing I was very, very impressed about, and I've said this before in my articles, is just how great the setup is here. There's no crazy calibration step. You literally stand up and look forward, wait 1 second, look down at your ankle. The headset cameras will then look at the IR LEDs here, and that's calibration done. You have now set up the trackers, and they will just work in any game that supports them. So a question I saw here from Daniel Leeper, which is the right question to ask. A lot of the time, the question that matters is what's the right question to ask, is how differently do these track when they are outside the headset's view versus not? So when you're looking down at them versus when you're just looking up. And so I find that when you're looking at them, right, so when you're looking down, the tracking is perfect. It is absolutely like you would have from a VR controller. Your legs, your ankles will be in the exact position they are in reality. When you're not, it's still very impressive, but it's not up to the state of full 6DoF trackers. But a lot of the time, if you're bringing your leg up for, I'm almost doing it here, not that you can see it, if you're bringing your leg up for something like dancing, for kicking, for sort of sports games that are going to integrate this, you're still going to have your gesture recognized. And a lot of the time, your leg is going to pass into the camera view, even for a couple of frames. And remember, if the camera can just see it for 1 or 2 frames, that then calibrates the tracking for until the next time it can see it and makes it better off. So it's this interesting hybrid tracking. But this is one of the things I'm most keen to stress test at home. Once I have these for a review unit, I will be testing these in a lot more detailed and different scenarios. But yeah, I tried this with a fitness game where you have to use your feet. That's not something any fitness game on Quest allows. There was also a demo app that I didn't try but looked very fun, which was kind of foot pool, which is you're playing pool, except instead of with your hands, you're using your feet to kick around giant balls on your floor. That sounds like a lot of fun. As you've said before, Ian, many times on this show, getting legs into VR opens up a completely new range of gameplay mechanics that developers can support. And it's something that right now in the standalone ecosystem is only happening on Pico.
I appreciate you bringing this photo of your ankles to our audience. They are all debating the geometry of your legs now. But the thing I would be really curious about is a version of these that have a little camera right on the front, downward facing towards your feet, to capture really precision feet and toe movements, which I'm going to send my commenters into a really weird direction by bringing that up. But I want to mention it because it doesn't feel like it feels like something like when you think about MX Inc. Arriving and the idea that now you've got a tracked pen, right? That's a big input device where you can do a lot of things with the tracked pen. I think it's just so it's so unfair to who we are as humans to not assume that you would do more with tracked legs than you would do with a pencil in your hand. Like I don't know I don't know what that says about human behavior or whatever, but like it's interesting you would get a pen before feet in virtual reality, before being able to walk around and have your actual feet tracked. But I appreciate you bringing up dancing, David, but like dancing is not a it like dancing and soccer arguably are the most important activities in the world to a large a large segment of the global population. Like, how many soccer fans are there in the world, and you can't play that game in VR? How many Dance Dance Revolution fans are there? You can't play that game in VR. And what I'm noticing with these trackers, David, is they've gotten smaller over the course of us doing this job. Right, the original Vive trackers were these big, chonky things. Then they made a slightly smaller Vive tracker. Then you had these Mocopi ones that were really tiny but didn't do all the tracking, and now you've got these Pico ones that are really tiny and do more of the tracking, but they don't do what like the Quest Pro controllers do, which have an onboard camera to track from inside out. Where I'm going with that is like, you know, this feels like the right time to give people really good full body tracking for a low cost, out the windows. Like, I don't think you're going to get good body tracking from onboard sensors right now. And if you wait 2 to 3 years to do that, you may miss the boat on some really great use cases.
Yeah, it's frustrating because on Quest you get upper body tracking, right? Barely any app uses it. I think a lot more will when Quest 3S comes out, but Quest 3 supports upper body tracking. It can actually track your arms, your shoulders, and your torso. And then over on Pico, you get leg tracking. I would love to put these two together, right? I asked Pico, are you planning to do upper body tracking inside out from the headset to combine with this? They said not at the moment. I think the problem is that Pico 4's cameras don't face as much down as Quest 3's. So Meta has an advantage there from the cameras. But yeah, you're right to say that if Meta does want to do this through purely computer vision, track your legs eventually, that's going to be a big challenge. With these, it's a challenge too to get sight of the leg trackers at all times, right? Because different body shapes are going to change things. Even, for example, what kind of trousers you're wearing, like even the kind of creases here would block them in many cases. All of their marketing will show someone wearing shorts for obvious reasons that it's the most visibility. But, if you're someone with a larger torso, you're going to have difficulty seeing these. So the IMUs, we're going to have to really test to see just how well these track in most conditions. But it's frustrating that you get upper body tracking on Quest and then lower body on Pico. And what people want is the union. I mean, obviously, you can kind of do that with Vive Tracker Ultimates, right? What you described of inside out tracking from, self tracked inside out tracking is what Vive Tracker Ultimates do. The problem is that they cost more for one than these cost for two. I think someone in the comments just asked the price here. It's €90 or £80. This product isn't coming to the US, so I don't know what it would be in dollars. One thing I think quickly before I speak, you can pair a third of these as well and put it on your torso. You can actually put a a third one. Pico right now only sells a 2-pack, but they told me at their launch event that they're considering selling an individual one with a torso strap, and they may then sell a 3-pack where you get one for each leg plus one for your torso, so that you can have that kind of torso tracking as well.
So there's Jorg's comment asking me what I'm smoking because the pen is clearly more important to more people than feet tracking. And I'm going to disagree with you flat out. Like I get it. I get where you're coming from, that there is a low hanging fruit there, but I'm going to argue that the lower hanging fruit is tracking. If you go back historically, David, correct me if I'm wrong on this, there is evidence and proof that when you improve tracking in VR, you improve the sense of immersion that you feel in that space. If you change resolution, if you change all the other field of view, you change all the other things about a headset, they're not going to impact your sense of being there as much as quality tracking will. Am I wrong on that, David?
No, I strongly agree with you. I think Jorg is probably coming from a creator's
No,
perspective, right? Where if you're a creator, then sure, having a pen is more important to you. But for a consumer, for someone who just wants to use this for games and for social, absolutely having your legs in there matters more. The idea that you can actually have your body in there, not just your upper body, but your legs too, that's going to matter for gaming and for social. If you're a VR chat user, this is going to be huge for you, right? The fact that if you just want to get a headset, or you don't have a body tracking setup, if you need to be on the go and you don't want to bring a base station everywhere with you, I'm just so impressed by the friction of these. And someone in the comments has tried these and said that they were impressed by how light they are. And I actually have a little funny anecdote about that. These things are so light that I actually walked off and almost stole them. I walked out of the demo and just walked away. Didn't even realize I still had them on my ankles until the developer of the game, very politely said, "Excuse me, you're about to steal my trackers."
So let's see here. Quentin, I think a plurality of people don't even walk around while playing VR. My question to you is why? You're going, like, the assumption built into your question is that's just ease of use, that it's lazy, right? It's a follow on from the way we already have done computers. It was a mistake. It was a mistake that computers kept us behind desks for the last 40 years. That's not the natural way for people to be. It's to walk around and be people, to go around the world. The VR headsets and AR glasses eventually are more natural ways of getting people to compute, of getting people to interact and do those things. So, like, I think the assumption that you're going to be seated for a majority of your time is like not rethinking what this computing platform offers to people at the right places. Like, you got to take a few steps back and realize maybe there's a majority of men using VR because you can't go dancing. You can't go on a date dancing in VR. And as absurd as that sounds to our audience, it's what was depicted in Ready Player One as a book and a movie as one of the long-term ideas of what VR could eventually enable. And if you're doing it with Beat Saber with your hands, that's not the same as precision tracking. I'm going to go out on a limb and argue that the headsets that will win long term, the winners of this race, will have the best tracking technology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I agree with you that people will stand the most, but what I do agree is that dancing is a huge use case for VR, and it's something that's mainly missing right now, right? A mainstream audience, for the same reason that people love just the basic sort of hand and arm rhythm of Beat Saber. If you can get this into a game that has, popular music and you're using your whole body to dance, there's a massive market there. And as I said, when this headset and these trackers launched in China on
you people are arguing
sorry,
there isn't a market for feet.
Yeah. One second. Just as I said before, it's crazy that Pico gave up Just Dance VR, the exclusive that they were going to be building with Ubisoft. They've given it up to Meta, and they could have come out. There could be a world where Pico is now advertising this headset with these trackers that you get for free with pre-orders, by the way. So pre-orders get these trackers and leg tracking for free, where they're marketing a Just Dance VR game that has these trackers support. And that's something that they're coming out with. It's mad to me that they gave that up, given that this is their unique selling point. We'll talk very soon about the headset itself, but like, as I keep saying, these things are the star of the show. It's wild that they're not doing more with it, but you could totally see that if this was being done by Meta, you could imagine them having it in Ubisoft's Just Dance, which was one of the most popular franchises of all time. Look at how popular Guitar Hero was in terms of games that broke out of the mainstream of core gamers and became hugely popular with regular people. You could also, obviously, the huge use case people are pointing out in the comments is soccer, right? If you, I can't believe I'm saying that word. It's football, but fine, soccer. If you look at how many people in the world own their Xbox or PlayStation as a FIFA machine, and they literally barely play any other games. Maybe they play Call of Duty, but there are a huge percentage of Xboxes and PlayStations out there in the world that are used purely as FIFA machines. And if you can get a football experience where they feel like they are there and using their feet and, interacting with the pros, it could even be something as basic as, you're doing penalties and different like challenges static while a famous footballer is digitally recreated and talking you through things. You could imagine headsets flying off the shelves in certain markets for that. There are massive opportunities. Ian is right to say there are massive opportunities for bringing feet into VR. We don't think about it now because we don't have it. So developers are building everything that doesn't need feet. But as we've seen time and time again, when you gave developers tracked controllers, there was skepticism about would these things be any useful, right? And I mean, all the way back with Oculus Touch and HTC Vive controllers, developers showed a plethora of use cases. When you gave them room scale, they found use cases. When you give them hand tracking, when you give them mixed reality, they've only just started to scratch the surface. If you give the talented VR developers out there legs, they will do amazing things with it. I'm sure of it.
All right, I appreciate you backing me up on that one, David. Although I think we've lost our audience. They are all lost to this idea. I think we've made them think about feet too much. Let's talk about your experience with the Pico 4 Ultra itself. I do need to get out of here at the top of the hour, so let's get through this. Thank you. Sure. I want to make one last pitch here to like and share this link out to others. Let people know about this introduction to VR that we have every week here with VR Download.
Yeah, so Guy Godin, the developer of Virtual Desktop, in the comments is saying that there's no way to query this tracker position through OpenXR, so it can only be used through Unity or Unreal. No way to forward this to the PC, not through your app, correct, but through Pico's own streaming solution, their equivalent to Airlink, Pico Connect. They do have full support for this, so you can use these trackers in anything that supports Vive trackers. They will show up to Steam VR as a Vive tracker. So for Pico users using Pico Connect, they can use this on PC. As well. So let's talk about the headset itself. We've gone through the trackers. We did it in kind of the opposite order we thought we would, but I think some people have either roasted or complimented my ankles. I'm not quite sure which, and let's not dig into that. We don't have the time. But now let's go to the top half of my body.
David, you've been teasing this audience for months with not showing the bottom half of your body, and then you threw up a 1080p picture of your bottom half, and then we talked about feet. I think we just destroyed some of them. I'm sorry, David.
Yeah. So you don't have the virtual bottom half of me, but you did just see the real bottom half of me. But this is the real top half of me using the Pico 4 Ultra and its ringless controllers. And so again, this was first impressions. This was a launch event. I spent a lot of the time wearing the thing and testing out the pass-through. In total, maybe 45 minutes to an hour in the headset, which was probably at most at a time without taking it off for a few seconds, 15 minutes, not because of comfort issues, just because, I'd be talking to someone from Pico. We tried to get, technical answers. I want to make sure that everything we tell you is accurate. I wanted to get an understanding of Pico's future, their design positions. That's why I'd kick it off for some times. But let's give you my first impressions, remembering that I will have a review unit soon for a full review. So if you've read my piece on UploadVR.com, there's going to be a lot of duplicate here, but I'll also take any audience questions. So the first thing I'll say is that it is still comfortable and well balanced. This thing inherits the design of the original Pico 4. If you didn't see the front, you wouldn't know there's any difference, because this is basically a Pico 4, but with the chipset upgraded to Quest 3's XR2 Gen 2 and the front sensor suite switched out, and 12 gigabytes of RAM and a slightly bigger battery, but in the same form factor. So it's still very well balanced. It's like getting a Quest 3 that has an elite battery strap out of the box, but no battery in the front. So the front visor is lighter than Quest 3, though it is thicker than Quest 3. It's lighter than Quest 3, and you get that counterbalance by default. I've always been a fan of Pico's headset design. I think this is a great overall balance. Now, the problem, of course, is just like with Play for Dream, just like with Quest Pro, you can't lean back on a chair or in bed. This thing is ideally designed for active usage, especially for something like room scale. So it's comfortable and it's well balanced. I have worn Pico 4, which again is pretty much the same design, and I would wear it for hours. I am a big fan of the design. The comfort is great. When you compare the price of this to Quest 3, a lot of people forget that you really should add the price of Quest 3 plus the price of an aftermarket strap, an elite battery strap, because that's what this thing basically has by default. Let's talk about the biggest claim here, though, which is ByteDance's claim that this thing has better pass-through than Quest 3. So there are two ways in which it is better, but one major way in which it isn't. So to start off with, the clarity is slightly better. On paper, the pass-through resolution is about 20% higher, and in reality, it feels that way. It also feels about 20% less grainy. So you do get this slight advantage over Quest 3. The lighting can handle, it can go a bit darker before it starts getting grainy. You can see, text a little bit further. It's a very marginal improvement, but it is noticeably there. The other advantage is moving objects. So if you put on a Quest 3 and move your hand like this, you'll notice a double imaging effect where, as it suggested, you'll see a ghost version of your hand going behind it. And that's because Quest 3 actually samples its cameras at quite a low frame rate. Pico is coming out and saying that they sample their cameras at 72 frames per second in 72 hertz mode and 60 frames per second in 90 hertz mode. And so you get this really smooth movement of your hands and other objects like your phone. And so to be clear, with Quest 3, you don't get that kind of double imaging on static objects. It's only moving objects. And we'll talk about soon how that can possibly be because of how these systems work. So to recap there, you get a slightly higher resolution view and you don't get distortion or double imaging on moving objects like your hands. Now, the step back and the compromise they make to achieve this is that the view is less depth and perspective correct. The biggest advantage of Quest 3's pass-through, and what Meta achieves this advantage by trading off that double imaging and a little bit of distortion, is that Quest 3's pass-through is depth and perspective correct. And one easy way to test this is when you stand still and turn your head from side to side on Pico 4, you'll notice that the real world skews. It doesn't stay static in place, right? When you're in VR or when you're in real life right now, turn your head like this, right? The world stays still because the world isn't moving, you're moving. When you do this in any headset that isn't perspective and depth correct, even Apple Vision Pro, you'll notice that the world slightly moves and skews a bit. And the only headset that I have ever tried that doesn't have this problem is Quest 3. And that's because, again, Meta uses this computationally intensive full frame reprojection pass-through approach where they are doing a depth map of everything you see and then reprojecting each pixel in the camera view. And that it really has those trade-offs, right? When Quest 3 launched, it had this horrible distortion because this depth map is so low resolution. With V68, they managed to dramatically improve it, or was it V67? Doesn't matter. With one of those updates, they managed to dramatically improve it, but there is still some distortion and you still get that double imaging, but you get perspective correctness. So Pico 4's pass-through, Pico 4 Ultra's pass-through is better in some ways, but worse in others. It's slightly sharper and it doesn't have double imaging, but it isn't as depth correct. It actually reminds me of the trade-offs Apple Vision Pro has made. It's very similar. Now, Vision Pro only has that lack of depth correct and perspective correctness in the near field. You need to be quite near your desk or a wall or your monitor to really notice that on Vision Pro. They do it really, really well, but it's still there and it bothers me. And one of the ways you can actually easily see it on any of these headsets is walk around, right? Go and walk down a corridor with a Vision Pro or a Pico 4 Ultra on, and you'll notice that the ground doesn't stay stationary, right? Your head is translating through space, yes, but the ground itself is still shifting relative to your head, relative to uh, where your head would be had it not moved. And Quest 3 is the only headset, again, where I look down and the ground is still. And it makes walking around in mixed reality feel comfortable in Quest 3 in a way that no other headset has done. But again, it comes with all of those horrible trade offs of double imaging and a little bit of distortion that you get in Quest 3. So it's very I love talking about this because it's fascinating to see the different approaches that these companies take to pass through, and I don't think enough people really take the time to explain the subtle differences.
It's really interesting to see Guy Godin respond back to in the comments there, right? We talked a little bit earlier about Big Screen Beyond. Big Screen Beyond has no pass-through. It's a VR headset through and through. There is no mixed reality. There's no cameras on that thing. It's using positional lighthouses, base stations in the corners of your room as beacons to tell it where it is in space. That's, it's a different thing. And I think we're going to have to move to the end of this episode, but I want to make this really, I don't know, philosophical argument that you put on an Apple Vision Pro. The very first thing you see is the Apple logo on a black background. That's virtual reality. That's where you start your journey in an Apple headset. And I find myself returning back to that again and again and again. I find myself tuning out the real world for the focus that VR brings me. I don't need that pass through all the time. I need it for short stints. Sometimes I set the world as my background for things so I can talk to someone else in the room. But like it's extremely freeing and it's amazing to take an Apple Vision Pro or a MetaQuest 3 to bed, put 5 windows up on your roof, on your ceiling, and there's complete darkness in your room. There's just no one is bothered. There's no one can see what you're looking at. It's a private cinema, a private workspace, and it's on your ceiling. And you can turn off. You don't need the physical world to have that experience, and it's only possible in a VR headset right now. If we start talking about AR glasses, we are talking about things with dramatically smaller field of view for all that virtual content. You're talking about cutting off the sides of your windows that you want to enjoy this way. These 4 windows, you can only have one of them, and it's cut off on the sides if you look away from it. That's the difference that we're going to have between these AR glasses that are getting pitched and the VR headsets that are the very core of what you get out of Meta and Apple. So like pass-through is only a value add for that core experience that I'm describing there. And I think it's really, really, really important. That's why I start off our shows sometimes, why I'm really growing into this language of describing VR as the foundation of the next generation of personal computing that you can add pass-through and all these other things back onto. But VR is still the special sauce here at the core.
So in some ways I agree, in some ways I disagree. I'll read out Guy Godin's comment that you're referencing there because I don't think you actually read out what he said. So he said, Guy Godin being the developer of Virtual Desktop, only hardcore VR people care about the pass-through quality. It's not really the selling point in today's market. So I'm actually going to strongly disagree and say that the exact opposite is true. Only hardcore VR people don't care about having pass-through on a headset. If you look at the reviews of Quest 3 on something like Best Buy or Amazon, where it's regular people just giving their thoughts, you'll see that people love the fact that between game sessions, that when just viewing something in the browser or doing basic multitasking, they have an awareness of their environment. Most people, live lives where they want to be aware of their environment. And Meta has said in multiple times that they've seen some of the biggest feedback of Quest 3 be that people are so happy to be able to see their environment around them. With Quest Pro, one of the things that people really enjoyed was the open periphery, so that they had this ability to see what's around them. And so mixed reality gaming is taking off pretty quickly right now. We're seeing from developers that are building mixed reality apps that they're getting some really great retention there. But again, even just the ability that when you are, in the headset updating your game or checking something that you have this ability to see your environment around you is significant. And then you get
Oh,
these emerging capabilities of headsets like multitasking, productivity, where a lot of the time, if you're on an aircraft or you're on a plane, or you're on a train, you want to at least be able to see the front half of you so that you're aware when the air steward or the ticket person for the train comes along, or if someone's walking alongside you. That ability to keep this is what these companies are actually seeing being a major influence. And if you look on even on enthusiast forums, right, you can see people who own a Quest 2 saying, I'm really looking forward to a Quest 3S that is cheaper and lets me have this color pass through surrounding. So I think I would argue that actually in 10 years' time, or even 5 years' time, mixed reality will probably be used more on these headsets than virtual reality.
what the thing? What I'm thinking about is the modes of use. The what I've noticed. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you use your VR headsets differently than this, let me know. But I put a VR headset on and it defaults to the pass-through view so I can see my environment and get situated, as some people in our comments are describing. But the moment I want to get working, the moment I actually want to do something with my headset that's more than just a game, like a Half-Life Alyx game or a game, the moment I want to work in a headset, I go to turn pass through off. I've gotten in this habit. I turn to do it in Apple Vision Pro, and I'm doing it in MetaQuest 3. I'm like, okay, let's get focused here. And that's it. That's literally what was going through my mind. Let's get focused. Boom, this goes off. Let's bring our windows out, and
Do you go
I'm ready
on
to
Vision
go.
Pro? Do you go all the way to VR or just partially?
Ooh, I think I typically go full VR on Apple Vision Pro because I like the audio quality change.
Okay. When someone walks into the room, do you have person detection on so that you can see them?
Typically,
Or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So how does that work without pass through? How can you see if how does that work without pass through? Even if you just want some pass through, right? There are going to be a lot of experiences that are partially virtual and partially real, right? And there are some mixed reality games on Quest which just show you your real floor, so that say you're playing and your dog or cat walks up, you can see your real floor, but everything else is virtual. The thing about mixed reality that people really need to understand is that it is a spectrum that goes all the way from you're in your real room and there's a pet on the floor, a virtual pet, to full VR where you're all in a full immersive environment. But along that way, you can choose exactly where you want to be. And there's experiences that will have, one half of your room entirely virtual, where one of your walls disappears and becomes this window into this gigantic virtual environment. But then, or even three of your walls, but then the wall behind you, the one that your wife and kids are going to be coming in from sometimes, is real. So you have this window into the real world and the virtual. And even if you want to do something like, even in Vision Pro, when you're in full VR, right? What do you see when you look down? Your real hands, right? Your real hands and arms. You can't do that without high quality pass through, right? That is literally coming from those pass through cameras. So it's not that you want to always be in pass through, but it's that you will want to mix some of the real world, even a little bit. And to do that, you need great pass through.
We need to wrap up here because I'm going to have to end at the top of the hour. But I do like this. I'm imagining this scenario in my head where you force the family to put on a tracker before they enter the VR space with you, like put this hard hat on almost situation before you come into my VR space. That's the alternative to this solution that we're talking about. So both of these aspects have really important things to think about. I find it very interesting to see such a variety of opinions out there.
Sure. I mean, if we have to wrap up, I'll just wrap up with the Pico 4 Ultra impressions then. So quickly, I'll go through this since we're running into our time limit here. Multitasking on Pico is interesting. You can have up to 20 apps compared to 6 on Quest because it has more RAM, but you can't adjust their depth. You cannot bring them closer or further from you. They're all at the same depth plane. So you have this kind of virtual 360-degree invisible bubble around you where you can place 2D apps wherever you want, up and down, left and right, but not forward and back, which I find to be net worse. It's very strange that this is how they've done it. There must be a technical reason behind it. Maybe this is like one giant texture that they're projecting to, probably. But yeah, you find that your apps would kind of, what's the word? they would be on top of each other the same way they would on a monitor, right? So you can open 20 windows on your monitor, but you wouldn't want to because they're all overlapping each other, right? Where if you imagined your monitor being like a magical 3D volume where you could position your apps with depth, you can then change things. And obviously on Vision OS and Horizon OS, it's not confined to a monitor. It's confined to anywhere. You can put the app wherever you want. And that's something that's missing on Pico. So in theory, better multitasking, in reality, held back by that software limitation. The other thing about Pico 4 Ultra is that while yes, its pass-through is better in some ways than others, yes, it has that same XR2 Gen 2 chipset. Yes, it has these tracked controllers. So it should be able to do everything Quest 3 can do. The problem is it's held back by the fact that it uses the same displays and lenses from Pico 4. The displays are fine, right? They're great, actually. The problem is that the lenses are 2 years old now, and they don't compare to Quest 3s. The lens, Meta is so far ahead of everyone else in lenses. It is, I don't know the right word for it, but Meta is so far ahead of everyone else in lenses. Pico is simply not there because they haven't even tried. They've used the same lenses they've used 2 years ago. You can tell they're better than Fresnel lenses, but they are like sort of nowhere near Quest 3's pancake lenses. They are pancake lenses, yes, but they're not at the same level. You do not get that edge-to-edge clarity you get on Quest 3. You don't get that, no matter where I set this on IPD, it looks amazing thing you get in Quest 3. You have to make sure you set your IPD correctly. There's one other question I had from a commenter here, which asks, does the room setup work the same as on Quest 3, or is it continuous? It is continuous. Like Apple Vision Pro, this headset continuously scans for a mesh of your environment and updates to the developer every few seconds, I think, with a new mesh. You don't have to go through a scanning process. That's great, and it's probably one of the biggest flaws with mixed reality on Quest 3. Sampler is asking about the field of view. It is taller than Quest 3, but not as wide. So Quest 3 is wider. Pico 4 Ultra is slightly taller.
Zach B saying you would think an optics behemoth like Zeiss would get into the lens game. They are. I believe that is the partner for Apple Vision Pro providing their lenses, isn't it?
No, it's providing their prescription lenses, the prescription inserts for Vision Pro. Zeiss is. I think they worked with someone on a headset in the past as well, but it must have been a while ago.
Yeah, and I want to say there is a very big market for lens technology underlying trying to supply everyone else. As David's kind of pointing out, Meta seems to be in the lead there with some of its lens technology, and that's the last millimeter to your eye. You used to think of the last mile of an internet connection to your house. Well, the lens is the last millimeter to your eyeball. It's a pretty important millimeter to get right, and so it's an important technology for Meta to have a lead on.
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to have to address is Daniel Leeper's criticisms of my legs. So the shoes you see there are actually barefoot shoes. So they don't have any padding underneath. So the scale looks wrong in that image, right? My feet look a lot bigger than they are in reality. Those are actually, you need to really change your perception of scale. My legs are not that size in reality. They're a bit thicker than
I love that. It's a good way to close out this episode is David Heaney defending the look of his feet. I think that's a good...
Well, my legs.
His ankles. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize for misdiagnosing what he was being defensive about there, but I love it. Thank you so much for the fun conversation this week. It's been a weird one. I appreciate the professionalism from some of you trying to get through that conversation, and I did notice the non-professional comments as well. Thank you so much. We'll be back on Tuesday with VR Gamescast and Don Hopper, and then we will be back on Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific with David Heaney for VR Download. As I've warned in the past, we are going to have a bunch of pre-recorded episodes very likely in the coming weeks as we go under embargo to see big things that are coming out to VR and AR headsets in the future. Please become a member to support our work. You can become a patron and support the work that we do as well. And hopefully we get a donations button at some point, because I think a bunch of you would love to throw a little bit of money at us from time to time to support the work that we do. So thank you so much. We'll see you in the future.
Thanks so much, everyone. Keep the analysis of my ankles going. We'll see you in the future.